What's up guys? Friday evening, walking home, so I'm going to do another video. Today I'm going to do it on a question that was posed to me by Andy Lockwood on Twitter. He wants to know what are the best agility tests to use for rugby and why. And I'm going to start this off by saying basically you can't really test agility unless you're measuring total outcomes like defenders beaten in the game. And I'm going to explain over the next few minutes why agility is so difficult to test. So number one is firstly to understand that agility is a psycho-perceptual motor skill. That means that you're measuring, or when you talk about agility, you're talking about several things altogether. Your ability to perceive your environment, detect and process relevant environmental stimuli, then to use that information to select an appropriate motor response, and then to execute that motor pattern in the most efficient manner possible, constantly updating that skill and modifying its timing and its execution based on continuous information coming in. So that is number one, why you can't test agility. So if you're really honest about what agility is, you can imagine that it's very, very difficult to try and measure that kind of stuff, because in reality you're measuring several things together. So number two is, well, if you look at some of the attempts that people have made to measure agility, you have some tests like, for example, the Illinois agility test, the T test, and so on. And the reality is that these aren't actually agility tests because there's no psychoperceptual element to them. It's a pre-planned movement. There's no detection of environmental stimuli, and there's no problem-solving aspect to it, and that's basically what sporting agility is. It's a movement-based problem-solving. So not only are those tests not really relevant or valid, if you look at the research, there's actually no difference between elite level and sub-elite level performers in tests like this. So if you are going to try and test something, you actually have to use something that is sensitive enough to tell the difference between elite and sub-elite, so that you can then implement an intervention to make those athletes better. So that's number two. So people have tried to go one step further than closed environments like the Illinois or like the T test, and they've tried to create so-called reactive agility tests. So this may be a movement pattern or a task where there are multiple outcomes and the athlete has to respond to a stimulus and execute that movement pattern as quickly as possible. So yes, that's a progression on top of closed environment agility, but still the stimulus is not going to be relevant to the sport or position, and there's no processing of that stimulus. The athlete still knows what they have to do. All they're doing is waiting for that stimulus so that they can then react. Again, not that realistic to sport, and that I'm aware of, there's no difference, again, between elite and sub-elite performers on general reactive tasks. Number four is a criticism that I would have of the majority of strength and conditioning tests, which is, well, it's great that the test tells you what the athlete did, but it doesn't tell you why they did it or what you need to do about it. So the result is fine. It allows you to grade players and so on, but it doesn't necessarily tell you why the athlete did it, the reason that they were so good or so bad, and how that's going to shape your decision making in the future and how you're going to train your athletes. And at the end of the day, that's what coaching is all about. You shouldn't just run tests to tell people they're shit or they're good, because they already know that, and you shouldn't be doing tests to pat yourself in the back and say, oh, isn't it great that the program works. What we should be trying to do with our testing is inform the training process, to use that test to give us information that we didn't have before, so that we can optimize the training process and move the athlete from a suboptimal state to an optimal state. And that's actually going to have to be quite an intuitive and organic process with agility. I'm not aware of any test that can allow you to dig down to the level that you need to find out why an athlete sucks or is very good at agility. Lastly, when you think about what makes for a good strength and conditioning test, typically we're talking about a standardized movement or task or protocol where everything is exactly the same from test to test, so that you can measure the outcome, compare one person to another, and track progress, so that everything is in a nice standardized and scientific manner. Now, the problem with that is it's completely at odds with the reality of sporting agility, where no two environmental cues are going to be exactly alike. The timing with which they're presented to the athlete is going to be different from rep to rep. The joint positions, the forces, where the player is in the playing area or the space is always going to change. And that's kind of what Bernstein talks about in repetition without repetition. So I think it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to use a standardized procedure or test to try and measure an ability or group of abilities where there is no standardization and there's a huge amount of creativity and problem solving going on. So even two athletes who are unquestionably elite at agility will solve the same tests via very different solutions and execute different movements in very, very different ways, but they're still successful. So how do you test for that? The answer is I don't know, and that's why I would advise not necessarily wasting your time, but don't invest the time in agility testing when you're not going to get a huge amount of actionable information back from that. As ever, if you like this, it's Keir at rugbystrengthcoach.com or Rugby Strength Coach on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Keep sending the questions, I'll keep them in the videos, and I'll talk to you soon.